Welcome to Creepy, the best horror storyteller on YouTube.
Part 1. The Silent Encounter.
In the quiet solitude of a quaint suburban town, nestled amidst rows of identical houses and manicured lawns, resided a young man named Thomas. An unassuming, almost invisible figure amidst the vibrant hum of everyday life, Thomas led an unremarkable existence, his days blending seamlessly into one another, devoid of any exceptional occurrence. Yet, beneath the placid surface of his ordinary life, there lurked an undercurrent of unease, a subtle discordance that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. It was an inexplicable sense of impending doom, a chilling premonition that something sinister was about to shatter the fragile tranquility of his existence. This creeping dread intensified one evening as Thomas ventured into the heart of the sprawling woods that bordered his neighborhood. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, eerie shadows that danced menacingly across the forest floor. A veil of silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves beneath his feet and the distant hoot of an owl. As Thomas delved deeper into the woods, an oppressive atmosphere descended upon him, a palpable sense of being watched, of being preyed upon by unseen eyes. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, eager to ensnare him in their grasp. Suddenly, a piercing screech echoed through the forest, sending shivers down Thomas's spine. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath caught in his throat. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard before, a primal cry that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the woods. Driven by an inexplicable curiosity, or perhaps by a morbid fascination with the unknown, Thomas pressed onward, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The forest seemed to grow darker, the air heavier, as if an unseen force was drawing him deeper into its clutches. And then he saw it. A shadowy figure emerged from the depths of the forest, its form indistinct, its movements erratic. It was tall, slender, and shrouded in a darkness that seemed to absorb the very light around it. Thomas stood transfixed, his body frozen in fear, as the figure glided towards him. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly luminescence, piercing through the darkness like beacons of malevolent intent. In that moment, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that threatened to consume him entirely. He knew, in the deepest recesses of his soul, that he had encountered something ancient, something evil, something that should never have been awakened. Before he could react, the figure lunged towards him, its movement swift and predatory. Thomas tried to scream, but no sound emerged from his parched lips. He braced himself for the inevitable impact, for the moment of his demise. But the blow never came. Instead, a blinding flash of light engulfed him, and he felt himself falling, tumbling through an endless void. When he finally regained consciousness, he found himself lying on the forest floor, the sun high in the sky, the familiar sounds of birdsong filling the air. The encounter with the shadowy figure remained etched in his memory, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. His life, once unremarkable and predictable, was now forever tainted by the knowledge of the darkness that lay hidden in the shadows.
Part 2. The Shattered Reflection.
The days that followed the encounter in the woods were a blur for Thomas. The vivid memory of the shadowy figure haunted his thoughts, casting a pall over his once mundane existence. He tried to convince himself that it had been nothing more than a hallucination, a product of his overactive imagination. But deep down, he knew better. The encounter had left an indelible mark on his psyche, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. His sleep became plagued by nightmares, visions of the shadowy figure tormenting him in his dreams. He awoke each morning feeling exhausted, drained of energy, as if some unseen force was siphoning the very life from him. His once placid demeanor began to unravel. He grew increasingly irritable, snapping at his friends and family, his patience wearing thin. The world around him seemed to lose its luster, the colors fading, the sounds becoming muted. One evening, as Thomas stood before the bathroom mirror, brushing his teeth, he noticed something odd. His reflection, usually a familiar sight, was now distorted, his features twisted into a grotesque caricature of himself. His eyes, once a warm hazel, were now cold and reptilian, his smile twisted into a sinister sneer. He stared at the reflection in horror, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to step back, to escape the image of his distorted self, but his body refused to obey. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own reflection. The distorted image reached out towards him, its fingers elongated and gnarled, its eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence. Thomas felt a surge of terror, a primal fear that threatened to consume him. He tried to scream, but no sound emerged from his parched lips. In that moment, he realized that the shadowy figure from the woods had not merely encountered him, it had infected him, leaving its mark on his very essence. The darkness had seeped into his soul, twisting and distorting his perception of the world. He was no longer Thomas, the unassuming young man from the suburbs. He was something else, something darker, something that no longer belonged in the world of the living. As the distorted image in the mirror grew closer, Thomas felt his consciousness slipping away, his grip on reality fading. He was being pulled into the darkness, into the realm of the unseen, where the rules of normalcy no longer applied. With a final, desperate surge of willpower, Thomas broke free from the mirror's hypnotic gaze. He stumbled back, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed. But the damage had been done. He was forever changed, a shattered reflection of his former self, a vessel of the darkness that now consumed him.
Part 3. The Whispers in the Darkness.
As Thomas descended deeper into the abyss of his own fractured psyche, the world around him began to warp and distort. The familiar streets of his neighborhood transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. The friendly faces of his neighbors were replaced by grotesque masks of fear. The whispers grew louder, echoing in his mind, a cacophony of voices that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of reality. They spoke of ancient evils, of forgotten horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. Thomas tried to shut out the whispers, to block out the voices that threatened to drive him mad. But they were relentless, their insidious words seeping into his mind, poisoning his thoughts, twisting his perception of reality. The once comforting sounds of everyday life became distorted, transformed into a symphony of discordant notes that grated on his nerves. The vibrant colors of the world faded into a monochrome palette of grays and blacks, as if the very essence of life was draining from his surroundings. He felt himself becoming unmoored, adrift in a sea of his own fragmented thoughts and emotions. The boundaries between reality and illusion blurred, and he could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was a product of his own tormented mind. The whispers grew louder, their voices intertwining into a single, haunting melody that echoed through his consciousness. They spoke of a world beyond the veil, a world of darkness and despair where he was destined to dwell. Driven by an irresistible compulsion, Thomas found himself drawn towards the heart of the woods, the place where he had first encountered the shadowy figure. He felt an inexplicable need to return to that place, to confront the darkness that had taken hold of him. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, their voices swirling around him like a swarm of hungry insects. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, eager to reclaim him into the darkness. Suddenly, he emerged into a clearing, the moonlight casting an eerie glow upon the scene before him. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the shadowy figure, its form as indistinct as before, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly luminescence. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, the voices filling his mind with images of unspeakable horror. Thomas felt his sanity slipping away, his grip on reality fading fast. He was on the precipice of madness, teetering on the edge of an abyss from which there was no return. The shadowy figure stepped forward, its movements fluid and predatory. Thomas stood frozen in terror, his body paralyzed by fear. He knew, in the deepest recesses of his soul, that this was the end, the final confrontation with the darkness that had consumed him. In that moment, Thomas accepted his fate. He closed his eyes, embracing the darkness, surrendering to the whispers that had haunted him for so long. He was no longer Thomas, the unassuming young man from the suburbs. He was something else, something darker, something that belonged to the shadows. And as the shadowy figure enveloped him in its embrace, he was finally at peace.
Part 4. The Harbinger of Despair.
Thomas, once an ordinary young man, had become a vessel of darkness, his very essence tainted by the malevolent entity that had invaded his soul. Now, he was a harbinger of despair, an embodiment of the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. His once familiar surroundings transformed into a reflection of his inner torment, a world shrouded in perpetual darkness, where the cries of the damned echoed endlessly. The people he once knew were now mere shells of their former selves, their faces contorted in masks of terror, their eyes reflecting the depths of their despair. Thomas wandered aimlessly through this desolate landscape, a solitary figure amidst the ruins of a world he once knew. He was no longer bound by the constraints of time and space, able to traverse the boundaries between reality and illusion with ease. The whispers that had once haunted him now served as his constant companions, urging him deeper into the abyss, guiding him towards the source of the darkness that consumed him. He no longer resisted their insidious influence. He had embraced them as his own. As he delved further into the heart of the darkness, Thomas encountered other beings, creatures twisted and deformed by the same malevolent force that had possessed him. They were drawn to him, recognizing him as one of their own, a fellow harbinger of despair. Together, they formed a macabre procession, a legion of darkness that marched through the ruins of the world, leaving behind a trail of desolation and despair. They were the embodiment of humanity's darkest fears, the harbingers of a world where hope had been extinguished and only darkness remained. Thomas led this legion, a puppet controlled by the unseen forces that had taken hold of him. He felt no remorse, no empathy, only a sense of emptiness and despair. He was a vessel of darkness, a harbinger of doom, and he relished the role he had been given. As the legion marched, the whispers grew louder, their voices intertwining into a cacophony of despair that echoed across the desolate landscape. They spoke of the end, of the inevitable collapse of reality, of the triumph of darkness over light. Thomas smiled, a cold, sinister smile that spread across his twisted face. He had found his purpose, his reason for existence. He was the harbinger of despair, the bringer of darkness, and he would not rest until all of existence was consumed by the abyss from which he had emerged.
Part 5. The Abyss Beckons.
Thomas, the harbinger of despair, led his legion of darkness through the ruins of the world, their march a relentless symphony of destruction and despair. The whispers that had once haunted him now echoed through the desolate landscape, a haunting dirge for a world on the brink of oblivion. As they ventured deeper into the heart of darkness, the boundaries between reality and illusion grew increasingly blurred. The once familiar landmarks of the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadows, a chaotic tapestry of nightmares and despair. Thomas felt an irresistible pull towards the source of the darkness, a gravitational force that threatened to consume him entirely. He knew, in the depths of his corrupted soul, that this was his destiny, his final act as the harbinger of doom. His legion followed in his wake, their forms twisted and distorted, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly luminescence. They were drawn to the darkness, their very existence fueled by the negative energy that emanated from its source. Finally, they reached the precipice, the edge of the abyss from which the darkness had emerged. The whispers grew louder, their voices a cacophony of despair that threatened to shatter the very fabric of reality. Thomas stepped forward, his body consumed by the darkness. He felt no fear, no regret, only a sense of grim satisfaction. He had fulfilled his purpose. He had brought the world to the brink of collapse. As he was engulfed by the abyss, he heard the whispers one final time, their voices echoing in his mind like the death knell of a world that was no more. Thomas, the harbinger of despair, had faded into the darkness, leaving behind a world in ruins, a world forever haunted by the echoes of his malevolent presence. The whispers lingered, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil, forever waiting to consume the unsuspecting souls who dared to venture too close.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more similar horror stories.